A weirdly common problem in Final Fantasy XIV, possibly especially because of the age of the game combined with the amount of changes the game has got over the years, is that some players will claim that something is true without ever checking if it actually is. Either because they assumed it is the way they think, or because it was like that at some point. Welcome to Final Fantasy XIV Mythbusters, where I and my friends highlight the odd claims and misconceptions players make, and test them to see whether they are true or not, while also explaining how you can test it yourself so you can learn how to science stuff in Final Fantasy XIV. Number 1. Be careful using barriers on Dark Knights because they need their TBN to break first. False. Barriers in Final Fantasy XIV naturally share one bar, however, hidden to the player, the barriers are ordered by a certain priority. TBN will always be consumed first before any other barriers. If creation diagnosis will always be consumed second after TBN. Most other barriers also have a priority. For example, the regular shields from your creation diagnosis and adloquium will always get spent before the crit shield does, regardless of order. We can test this theory and the claim with TBN specifically by entering a fight with a reasonably strong pack of enemies, have a scholar apply a big meaty adloquium shield to the Dark Knight, and then have the Dark Knight use TBN. Observe then that the shield that breaks first is still TBN. If you want to have an easier time with getting the shield to break, you can use a special trick where you unequip all of your gear on the Dark Knight, then use TBN, then re-equip your gear such that the barrier is relatively small, and then engage the enemies. As adloquium does not scale with your gear, that shield will still be much bigger by comparison. Number 2. You can spend MP on an OGCD before the MP gained from Blood Weapon or Delirium is received. True, but this one is often misunderstood because the claim is made generally when it only works specifically with Bloodspiller. What the claim suggests is usually then tested with Hard Slash because ultimately that is when it matters in most cases, where it will fail, leading to the assumption that it is false. The reason why it works for Bloodspiller is that Bloodspiller specifically applies its damage much later than any other attack in the Dark Knight toolkit. Now, the reason why we are mostly interested in if it worked for Hard Slash is because most optimized openers lead with a 1-2-3 combo to reach Living Shadow as fast as possible, which then leads to the conundrum that to not lose any MP generated by Blood Weapon, you can use TBN so that you engage combat with less than full MP. But if you could spend MP after a GCD, but before the MP recovery, then you could use Hard Slash first without losing anything. You can test this by using Delirium and Blood Weapon, and then use Bloodspiller immediately followed by Edge or Flood of Shadow. Observe that you will land on over 7500 MP, regardless of MP ticks. Alternatively, if you do the exact same sequence, but replace Bloodspiller with Hard Slash, you will not get MP from Blood Weapon. In other words, the claim is true, but not universally. Number 3. You can animation cancel limit breaks long end lag with rescue from a friend. False. Different roles limit breaks have different cast times and end lag. To be specific, tank limit breaks are instant but lock you in place, unable to do anything else for around 2 seconds for LB1 and nearly 4 seconds for LB2 and 3. Healer LBs have a cast time of 2 seconds, but then lock you in place for around 2, around 5 and around 8 seconds afterwards. DPS limit breaks have cast times of 2, 3 and 4.5 seconds and animation locks of 3 to 4 seconds. So it is somewhat well known that if you use rescue on someone in the middle of casting limit break, if they haven't finished the cast yet, they will be interrupted, allowing you to halt an LB you might not agree with using. It also has the bonus effect of causing whoever you stopped to possibly be very cross with you though. However, while you would be locked in place due to the end lag of the LB animation, technically the entirety of the action has already been used by the time the cast bar is filled. And given that the animation doesn't root the user in place, you can still pull them to you. However, despite the character animation ending when rescued, the user stays unable to move. You will have to take my word for it in these demonstrations that I am holding forward to move with no luck. This also occurs just the same if you rescue someone in the middle of other movement locking actions such as Stardiver. You can be rescued, but it doesn't mean you get to skip the animation lock. This is, however, much harder to catch, since the animation of the rescue slide itself tends to outlive the Stardiver animation. This is why it is somewhat significant that the limit break end lag tends to be very long, especially for healers. Now, you might think this is nearly impossible to actually test, because you'd need both limit break 3 and also someone to rescue in real content, right? Wrong. This is actually quite easy to test. Bring one friend along with access to a healer job and go into Explorer mode in any dungeon you like. Put down the striking dummy for extra accuracy, remove all equipment and then re-equip it to reduce your current HP down, then make sure both players are in combat by striking the dummy. Then have one of you cast the healer limit break 3, and once the cast is finished, have the other player use rescue. You should receive the healing, and the rescue should work as expected. However, the limit break user will be unable to move for the remainder of the end lag. I recommend testing by holding forward. You can do this exact same test with a DPS limit break if you like. The damage should still appear, just keep in mind that the time frame to use a rescue is shorter. Number 4. Interrupting later in a cast leads to less auto attacks from the enemy as they waste more time casting. False. Now, this claim makes logical sense if we assume mobs play completely logically. However, they might not. The claim suggests that if you interrupt an enemy at the start of their cast, then they will immediately resume attacking, so waiting until the very last moment of the cast to interrupt them will delay their swings for longer. To test this, find a mob with an interruptible action. First, interrupt the mob as late as possible in the cast, and then pay close attention to how fast the mob starts swinging again. Note that it is important you interrupt the mob and not stun it, as this is not the same. This will make sense later. Then, the second time, interrupt the mob as fast as possible and take note whether it took less or more time before it started swinging again. One example of mobs that can be helpful for such a test are the chimeras from Fractal Continuum Hard, as they will regularly cast Dragon's Voice, which is interruptible. They're also stunnable, which will be helpful later. First, observe how long the mob stands there after being interrupted in the very last moment of its cast. Then, shortly after, observe how long it stands there when interrupted immediately. It is clearly taking it even longer before it starts attacking again. So, in conclusion, it doesn't matter when you interrupt in a cast, as long as you do. In fact, it may actually be better to interrupt early to get it over with so someone else doesn't waste their interrupt as well. It also means you put your interrupt on cooldown sooner, allowing you to use it again sooner. Now, that actually leads to another claim. Number 5. Using a stun as an interrupt causes mobs to attack immediately after the stun ends, which interrupts don't do. True. What? So, this claim suggests that mobs interact significantly differently with stuns and interrupts, in that the interrupt causes the mob to stand there dumbfounded for a while after the cast is stopped, longer if you interrupt them early, which turned out to be true. This claim then suggests that stuns don't have this attribute. If this is correct, then it means that the mobs are explicitly programmed to stand there dumbfounded after an interrupt, and not after a stun. This is a bit harder to test, however, if you have a blue mage it is rather easy, as we would need a stun that is clearly shorter than the cast time. Otherwise the mob would obviously start attacking immediately after, as its swing timer has been ready for a while, even including the detail from interrupting. So to test this, we bring a blue mage with the spell Perpetual Ray into Fractal Continuum Hard. For extra accuracy, also bring Flying Sardine. First, when a chimera casts Dragon's Voice, use Flying Sardine immediately to interrupt it, and observe how long it takes before the chimera attacks again. The next time a chimera uses Dragon's Voice, instead use Swiftcast into Perpetual Ray to intercept it with a 1-second stun. Observe that the chimera this time immediately swats at me, suggesting that this claim is also true. In other words, interrupting interruptible actions with an actual interrupt is objectively superior to using a stun, as the interrupt itself comes with a hidden, never mentioned anywhere, mini-stun for a few seconds as a side effect, which is also longer if the cast is interrupted earlier. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Shadowbringers, interrupts were instead 1-second silence effects that simply prevented the mob from finishing their cast on account of being silenced. This of course suggests that only spells are interruptible. With Shadowbringers, both the pulsing cast bar effect and the rework of 1-second silence actions to instead interrupt were applied. However, the ninja 1-second silence with a damage component, Joculate, was coincidentally also removed with the release of Shadowbringers, leaving only tanks and ranged physical with interrupts.